The Sahel sun hung merciless in the afternoon sky, casting waves of heat across the dusty roads of northern Burkina Faso. In this land where tradition met the harsh realities of modern conflict, where ancient masks told stories older than memory itself, a young leader was about to experience a moment that would remind him why his people called this nation the land of honest people. Ibrahim Traoré had taken power 2 years ago with fire in his eyes and revolution in his heart. At 36, he was the world's youngest head of state, carrying the weight of a nation bleeding from jihadist violence. Every day brought news of ambushes, improvised explosives tearing through convoys, communities displaced by the thousands. The armed groups had learned the rhythm of government movements, the patterns of military escorts, the vulnerable stretches where cell phone networks died and help could not reach. This particular afternoon, Traoré was returning from a visit to military outposts in the Sahel region, where his soldiers fought daily battles against extremist forces. His convoy consisted of 6 armored vehicles, their green paint dulled by red dust, moving steadily along the road between Djibo and Bozanga, a route that had seen too much blood in recent months. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Chapter 1. The Road of Dust and Determination. The convoy moved with practiced precision through the barren landscape. Captain Traoré sat in the third vehicle, his military fatigue still crisp despite the heat, reviewing security reports on a tablet. The numbers were sobering. 17 convoy ambushes in the past 3 months along major routes, hundreds dead. The insurgents had become bolder, more sophisticated in their tactics. Through the reinforced window, he watched the landscape roll past. This was the Mossy Plateau, heartland of Burkina Faso's largest ethnic group. In better times, these roads would have been busy with traders carrying goods between villages, farmers returning from markets, women in colorful wraps carrying children on their backs. Now the roads were often empty, abandoned to military convoys and the insurgents who hunted them. Colonel Sawadogo, his head of security, sat across from him, speaking into a radio. Eagle 1, this is Command. Status report on Route Charlie. The radio crackled. Command, Route Charlie appears clear. No unusual activity detected by advance team. Proceeding as planned. Traoré nodded, but didn't relax. He had learned in his years fighting terrorism that appears clear could change to active ambush in seconds. The armed groups had perfected the art of concealment, hiding in the bush, waiting with the patience of hunters who knew their prey had no choice but to pass their way. His thoughts drifted to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who had renamed this country 4 decades ago. Sankara had believed in self-reliance, in breaking the chains of foreign dependency. Traoré had taken up that torch, nationalizing gold mines, rejecting Western military presence, building alliances with those who respected sovereignty. But revolution required security, and security seemed increasingly fragile in this land of honest people being terrorized by those who knew no honesty. The convoy maintained a steady 60 kilometers per hour. Too fast and they might miss threats. Too slow and they became easier targets. The lead vehicle carried electronic countermeasures against remote detonated bombs. The rear guard watched for pursuit. Everything followed protocol developed through bitter experience. Traoré's phone buzzed with a message from his aide in Ouagadougou. Another displaced persons camp had reached capacity. Food supplies were running low in the eastern provinces. A journalist wanted an interview about his recent speech on Pan-African unity. Normal things, abnormal times. Sir, we're approaching the bend near Kamsaogo village, Sawadogo announced, consulting his map. 15 kilometers from there to our next checkpoint. Traoré acknowledged with a slight gesture. Kamsaogo. He remembered the village from his training days, before the insurgency had consumed the north. There had been a weekly market there, famous for its pottery. Now, like so many villages in the Sahel, it was partially abandoned, its people scattered to camps around Ouagadougou. The landscape here was sparse Sahel savanna, scattered acacia trees providing minimal shade, the earth baked red and hard. During the rainy season, this region could transform briefly into something greener, but now in the dry season it resembled the edge of the Sahara that loomed to the north. The convoy rounded a gentle curve, and suddenly the lead vehicle's brake lights flashed red. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Obstacle. The convoy slowed abruptly, vehicles compressing like an accordion. Traoré's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm as Sawadogo barked into his radio. "What's the situation? Why have we stopped?" A moment of static, then the lead vehicle's commander responded, his voice carrying an unexpected note of bemusement. "Command, you're not going to believe this. We have a cow in the road." "A cow?" Sawadogo repeated, his face betraying confusion. "Affirmative. A zebu. Big one. Just standing in the middle of the road, not moving." Traoré leaned forward to peer through the windshield. Sure enough, perhaps 50 meters ahead, he could see the distinctive hump-backed silhouette of a zebu cattle, the breed adapted to the Sahel's harsh conditions. The animal stood completely still in the center of the narrow road, as immovable as a statue. Sawadogo's expression darkened with suspicion. Could be a trap. Animal tethered there as bait. Team 2 scanned the surrounding area. Full perimeter check. The security protocol for unexpected obstacles was clear. In the past 18 months, insurgents had used everything from abandoned vehicles to livestock carcasses to slow convoys before triggering ambushes. No obstacle could be trusted. Traoré watched as soldiers dismounted from the second vehicle, spreading out in defensive positions, weapons raised, eyes scanning the sparse vegetation. The afternoon heat created shimmering mirages on the distant horizon. Somewhere, a bird called out, its cry sharp in the still air. "Sir, I recommend we reverse and take the alternate route through Bani," Sawadogo suggested. "This delay puts us behind schedule, and the longer we stay static, the more vulnerable we become." It was sound tactical thinking. Standard procedure would be to avoid any unexplained obstacle rather than risk the convoy. But something made Traoré hesitate. Perhaps it was the memory of his geology training, where patience in observation often revealed solutions. Perhaps it was the thought of his people, for whom a cow represented significant wealth, weeks of saved income, hope for a family. "Hold position," Traoré ordered. "Let's not panic over a cow. See if we can move it safely." 2 soldiers approached the animal cautiously, weapons at the ready. The zebu regarded them with the characteristic placid expression of its kind, chewing cud contentedly. It was a healthy specimen, its hide a reddish-brown, its distinctive hump prominent. Around its neck hung a woven collar in the traditional Fulani style, colorful strands of fiber indicating it belonged to someone. One soldier extended his hand slowly, making gentle clicking sounds. The cow didn't move. He tried shooing it with hand gestures. The cow blinked slowly and remained exactly where it stood. "A stubborn animal," the soldier muttered into his radio, "like it's rooted to the spot. Check for tethers, wires, anything artificial," Sawadogo commanded. The soldiers circled the cow carefully, examining the ground, the animal's legs, looking for any sign of human intervention. Nothing. Just one exceptionally stubborn zebu with no apparent intention of moving. Traoré couldn't help but smile slightly at the absurdity. Here he was, leader of a nation in crisis, held up by a cow. If this leaked to the press, the jokes would write themselves. "Command, area scan complete," came the report from the perimeter team. No hostile presence detected, no disturbance in vegetation, no heat signatures. Looks genuinely clear. Still, they waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The cow remained immovable. Chapter 3. Patience and Providence. 15 minutes had passed, and the zebu had become the most frustrating obstacle Ibrahim Traoré had faced all week. The soldiers had tried everything short of physically lifting the animal. They'd shouted, waved arms, even fired a warning shot into the air. The cow had flinched at the gunshot, but then settled back into its chosen spot as if nothing had happened. "Oh, this is ridiculous," Sawadogo muttered, checking his watch for the 3rd time. "We're already 20 minutes behind schedule. The advance team at the next checkpoint is asking for our status." From within the vehicle, Traoré watched a small figure emerge from the sparse bush off to the right side of the road. An elderly Fulani herder, his weathered face creased with age, approached with slow, measured steps. He wore the traditional bubu of his people and carried a herding stick worn smooth by years of use. "Hold fire," Traoré commanded immediately, seeing his soldiers tense. "That's probably the owner." The old man seemed utterly unconcerned by the armed convoy. He walked directly to the cow, speaking to it in soft tones, words in Fulfulde that carried on the hot breeze. The cow's ears twitched forward, listening. The herder placed a weathered hand on the animal's side, continuing his gentle conversation. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the cow simply turned and walked off the road, following the old man toward a cluster of acacia trees where two other zebu waited. Sourdough immediately ordered a soldier to question the herder. The young private approached respectfully, speaking in Moure, the most common language in Burkina Faso. "Elder, forgive the question, but how long has your cow been standing in the road?" The old herder squinted at the soldier, then at the convoy, then broke into a gap-toothed smile. "Ah, young warrior, my Fatima, she is old like me. Sometimes she stops to think about life. Who can say how long? In the time of cattle and God, minutes and hours blend like water." The soldier tried again, more directly. "We need to know, Elder. Was she there before you heard us coming?" The herder's expression grew more serious. He nodded slowly. "Yes, young man. I was tending the others when I looked and saw her there, standing like a chief. That was before I heard your engines. I thought, 'Old Fatima, what are you doing?' But she is 13 years old and has earned the right to her mysteries." The soldier reported this back to Sourdough, who relayed it to Traoré. The captain considered for a moment, then made a decision. "Ask him if he needs anything, medical supplies, information about safe areas, and give him something for his trouble." When the soldier conveyed this, the old herder shook his head firmly. "Keep your money for bullets and food for your men. But I will tell you something, since you ask. This road has not been safe. Last month, I lost my nephew. He was traveling with traders to Burzanga. They never arrived." His voice carried the weight of grief worn smooth by time. "Be careful, young captain. The bad men, they know these roads like we know our cattle." The soldier thanked him and returned to the convoy. As the vehicles prepared to move again, Traoré watched the old man lead his 3 zebu back into the scrubland, disappearing among the acacias like a mirage dissolving in the heat. "All right," Sourdough announced. "All units, prepare to move. Let's make up for lost time." "Negative," Traoré said quietly. "We proceed at standard speed. No rushing." Sourdough looked at him questioningly but nodded. Orders were orders. The convoy began rolling forward again, passing the spot where the cow had stood. Traoré noted the cattle tracks in the dust, the flattened grass where the animals had been grazing. Everything about it seemed innocent, random, the kind of minor delay that meant nothing. But in war, he had learned, nothing was truly random. Everything meant something, even if that meaning only became clear later. As they continued toward Burzanga, Traoré found his mind returning to the old Fulani herder's words. "The bad men know these roads like we know our cattle." It was the kind of wisdom his own grandfather might have offered, truth wrapped in the language of the land. The convoy made it another 12 kilometers without incident, the landscape unchanging, the heat relentless. They were approaching the scheduled checkpoint, a small military outpost that monitored this stretch of road. Chapter 4. The Discovery. The checkpoint commander, Lieutenant Zungrana, was waiting as the convoy pulled in. His face was grim as he approached Traoré's vehicle. "Captain Traoré, sir," he saluted sharply. "I would need to report an incident." Traoré stepped out, stretching his legs after the long ride. "What kind of incident, Lieutenant?" "Sir, about 45 minutes ago, our patrol drone picked up suspicious heat signatures approximately 8 kilometers back, near the area designated as Sector 7 on the maps. That's the section with the sharp curve near Kamsaugo village." Sourdough was immediately alert. "And what kind of signatures?" "Multiple individuals, sir. Concealed positions on both sides of the road. We couldn't get close enough for positive identification without risking the drone. But the positioning was consistent with an ambush setup. By the time we mobilized a response team, the signatures had dispersed." Traoré felt his chest tighten. "Show me the exact location." Inside the checkpoint's operations room, Lieutenant Zungrana pulled up the drone footage on a laptop. The thermal imaging showed the road snaking through the sparse landscape. And there, clustered on both sides of a particular curve, were multiple heat signatures in positions that made tactical sense for an ambush. "What's the estimated timing?" Sourdough asked, his voice tight. "Based on the drone's timestamp, those positions were occupied between 14 and 14:35 hour Indian, sir." Sourdough pulled out his own tablet, checking their convoy's timeline. His face went pale. "Sir, if we had maintained standard speed without any delays, we would have reached that exact section of road at approximately 14:20 hours. The room fell silent as the realization settled over everyone present. "Guide the cow," Traoré said quietly. "We were delayed by the cow for at least 20 minutes. Sir, with respect, that's an incredible coincidence," Lieutenant Zungrana said carefully. "I don't believe in coincidences," Sawadogo replied, studying the map intently. "Not when it comes to convoy security. We need to send a team to that location immediately. Full forensic sweep." Traoré nodded his approval. "Do it. I want to know everything. Evidence of how many people, what weapons they might have been carrying, where they went after dispersing." As the lieutenant moved to organize the response team, Traoré stood staring at the thermal image frozen on the screen. The positions were professional, coordinated. This hadn't been opportunistic. Someone had planned this, had known or guessed his route, had prepared to strike. Sawadogo approached him quietly. "Sir, we need to discuss route security protocols. If they had intelligence on your movements—" "Later," Traoré interrupted gently. "First, let's find out what actually happened out there." The response team departed within minutes, taking the alternate route to avoid potential secondary ambushes. Traoré used the waiting time to make necessary calls to Ouagadougou, keeping his tone measured, his words careful. No need to spread alarm before they had facts. An hour later, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Sahel in shades of gold and amber, Lieutenant Zungrana's voice crackled over the radio. "Command, this is Response Team 1. We've reached the site. Sir, you're going to want to hear this." "Go ahead, Lieutenant," Traoré replied. "Sir, we found evidence of at least 12 individuals in ambush positions. Fresh disturbance in the soil where motorcycle kickstands were placed. Shell casings from AK pattern rifles. And sir, we found 3 improvised explosive devices buried in the road surface. They're wired for remote detonation. Bomb disposal is working on them now, but they're sophisticated, military-grade components." The room fell silent again. Sawadogo's expression had gone from concerned to coldly furious. "There's more, sir," the lieutenant continued. "We found boot prints and we're taking casts. But most significantly, we found a timing log. Looks like it was dropped by one of the ambush team. It has estimated arrival times for convoys based on standard travel speed from Djibo. So your convoy was the target. They knew you were coming." Chapter 5. The Weight of Inches. Ibrahim Traoré stood outside the checkpoint, looking toward the spot 8 kilometers distant where death had waited for him. The evening air was cooling, but he felt no relief from the heat. His mind was replaying the afternoon, every detail, every decision. A cow had saved his life, not the advanced security protocols, not the armored vehicles, not the trained soldiers. A stubborn zebu that refused to move had created a delay just long enough to throw off the insurgents' carefully calculated timing. Sawadogo emerged from the operations room, his expression troubled. "Sir, the forensic team confirms it was a professional setup. They estimate at least a dozen fighters, possibly more. With 3 IEDs and coordinated small arms fire from both sides, if we had hit that section at the anticipated time, casualties would have been severe. The first explosion would have disabled the lead vehicle. The second would have hit yours or the one behind you, and the third would have cut off any retreat." "What about the fighters themselves? Any identification?" "Not yet, but the methodology matches recent ambushes attributed to groups operating in this region. We're cross-referencing with intelligence reports, most likely a cell affiliated with one of the larger jihadist organizations that have been expanding operations in the Sahel." Traoré nodded slowly, processing this. These weren't random bandits or opportunistic criminals. These were organized insurgents with resources, intelligence-gathering capabilities, and most troubling of all, information about his movements. "Lieutenant," Traoré called to Zungrana, who approached quickly. "That old herder we encountered, the one with the cow. Did your checkpoint log any civilians passing through from that direction in the past few days?" "I'll check our records, sir." Zungrana disappeared back inside. Sawadogo was already ahead of him. "Sir, you're thinking the herder might have been a scout or a delaying agent." "I'm thinking we need to consider all possibilities, but something doesn't fit. If they wanted to delay us deliberately, there are less obvious ways to do it. A cow in the road draws attention, requires investigation. If I were planning an ambush and needed to adjust timing, I'd use something subtler. Unless they wanted you to think it was random," Sawadogo countered. "Make it so obvious it seems innocent." Lieutenant Zungrana returned with a tablet. Sir, we have records of a Fulani herder named Amadou Dicko passing through the checkpoint 3 days ago, heading northwest with a small herd. Description matches the man you encountered. He's known in the area, has passed through our checkpoint multiple times over the past year. No security flags, no suspicious activity reported. 3 days ago, Traoré mused. That's before my visit to the northern outposts was even finalized. This detail changed the calculation. If the herder had been a scout, he would have needed to know about the convoy's timing more recently. 3 days ago, even Traoré hadn't known exactly when he'd be returning on this route. Sir, one of the communications officers called from inside. We have Response Team 1 on the line. Bomb disposal has successfully disarmed all 3 IEDs. They're requesting permission to bring them back for detailed analysis. Granted, Traoré replied, and tell them good work. As night settled over the Sahel, transforming the landscape into a realm of shadows and distant sounds, Traoré found himself thinking about coincidence and providence. He was a soldier, trained to think in terms of tactics and strategy, to see patterns and plan countermoves. But he was also Burkinabe, raised in a culture where the visible world and the invisible one intertwined, where his grandmother had taught him that cattle had souls and the land had memory. "What are you thinking, sir?" Sawadogo asked, joining him in the quiet darkness outside the checkpoint. "I'm thinking about what it means to lead a nation where nothing is certain, where every road might hide death, where a cow can be the difference between life and extinction." Traoré paused. "And I'm thinking about the old herder's words. In the time of cattle and God, minutes and hours blend like water." He knew something, Sawadogo, maybe not specifically, maybe not consciously, but he knew. "Sir, with respect, you're suggesting some kind of—" "I'm suggesting nothing mystical," Traoré interrupted, but not unkindly. "I'm suggesting that people who have lived on this land for generations, who tend cattle and watch the roads, they notice things, patterns, strange movements, groups of men where men shouldn't be. And maybe an old herder's cow, stubborn or not, was exactly where it needed to be, when it needed to be there." Sawadogo was quiet for a moment. "Should we bring him in for questioning?" "No. If he's innocent, we'll have terrorized an old man who lost his nephew to these same insurgents. If he's somehow involved, questioning him won't yield anything useful. Better to have our intelligence people track movements in that area quietly and triple our security protocols for all future movements. Case to be continued with the investigation results in the coming days." Chapter 6. Echoes in the capital. News of the attempted ambush reached Ouagadougou by morning, spreading through the capital like wind across the Sahel. By noon, the story had evolved, taking on layers of interpretation depending on who was telling it. In the markets of the city's eastern quarters, where traders sold everything from colorful fabrics to fresh mangoes, people spoke of divine intervention. At the university, students debated the implications for national security. In the military compounds, soldiers shared the account with grim satisfaction that their leader had survived another attempt. Traoré returned to the capital by helicopter, bypassing the roads entirely. From the air, Burkina Faso spread beneath him in its stark beauty, red earth and sparse green, villages clustered like islands in an ocean of Sahel. Each cluster represented families, hopes, struggles. Each represented people he had sworn to protect. His deputy, Colonel Zerbo, met him at the presidential compound. "Sir, the council is requesting an immediate briefing. Also, the Minister of Defense wants to discuss enhanced security measures, and we're receiving queries from our intelligence network about possible infiltration of route planning." "Schedule the council for this afternoon," Traoré replied, striding toward his office. "Tell the minister I'll see him first, and I want a complete review of everyone who had access to my travel plans for yesterday. Everyone." The office was as he'd left it, papers on the desk, a map of Burkina Faso on the wall marked with various indicators of security incidents, red pins for attacks, yellow for suspicious activity, blue for military outposts. The map was more red than any other color. Traoré sat heavily in his chair, the first moment of true stillness since the cow had stopped his convoy. In the quiet, the reality settled over him. He had come within minutes of death. His security team, the soldiers in his convoy, all of them had been that close to devastation. A knock at the door brought his attention back. "Enter," His intelligence chief, Major Ouedraogo, stepped in carrying a secured tablet. "Sir, we have preliminary analysis of the ambush site. I think you need to see this immediately." Traoré gestured for him to continue. "Sir, based on the physical evidence and the timing log we recovered, this operation was planned at least 3 weeks in advance. The IEDs were buried 2 days ago. We can tell from soil compression and weather patterns. But here's what's most significant." Major Ouedraogo pulled up an image on the tablet. "This timing log, it's not just notes. It's a full operational plan. Multiple potential target dates, multiple convoy patterns. Sir, they've been tracking you for weeks. The implications were staggering. This wasn't an opportunistic attack. It was a sustained intelligence operation." "How did they know?" Traoré asked quietly. "My movements aren't publicized. Even most of my own staff don't know my schedule more than a day in advance. That's what we're investigating, sir. But we have to assume there's either a leak somewhere in our communication chain, or they've found a way to monitor our movements through other means. Perhaps surveillance of the outposts you visit, tracking helicopter movements, even informants among civilian populations along major routes. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more and more content." Traoré stood and walked to the map on his wall, studying the location of the attempted ambush. It was positioned perfectly, a spot where the road narrowed, where response time from nearby military posts would be delayed, where the terrain offered cover for attackers and limited options for defenders. "Professional, sir," he said aloud. "This level of planning requires resources, training, intelligence-gathering capability. This isn't a local cell operating independently. This has external support. We're exploring all connection, Misa, but there's something else." Major Ouedraogo pulled up another image. "The boot prints we found. They match patterns we've seen at other attack sites across the Sahel. We're fairly certain at least 3 of the individuals at your ambush site have been involved in previous operations, including the convoy attack near Djibo last month that killed 11 soldiers. The Djibo attack. Traoré remembered it well. It had been one of the incidents that had prompted his visit to the northern outposts to boost morale, to show his soldiers they weren't forgotten. And somehow, that very response had nearly led to his death. "These groups are adapting," Major Ouedraogo continued. "They're learning our patterns, our responses. When you visited the north, they correctly predicted you'd return by road to maintain visibility, to show strength. They're not just fighting us militarily, sir. They're fighting us psychologically, studying our leadership patterns." Traoré returned to his desk, his mind working through the implications. If they could predict his movements with this level of accuracy, no route was safe. But more than that, it revealed a sophisticated intelligence apparatus that went beyond what they'd previously estimated. "Double our counterintelligence operations," he ordered. "I want communication protocols completely revamped. Randomize my schedule to the extent possible. And Major, I want you to personally oversee a review of everyone, and I mean everyone, who touches any information related to my movements. We're being watched, and I want to know by whom." Major Ouedraogo saluted and departed, leaving Traoré alone with his thoughts and his map full of red pins. Chapter 7. Finding the Truth. By evening, Traoré had met with his defense counsel, briefed his closest advisors, and authorized a comprehensive security review. But throughout all of it, his mind kept returning to one image, the old Fulani herder standing in the afternoon sun, speaking gently to his cow. "Sir, there's someone here to see you," his aide announced. "He's insisting it's urgent." "Who?" "He says his name is Amadou Dicko. He's the herder from yesterday. He walked here from the Sahel. Says he needs to speak with you personally." Traoré felt a jolt of recognition. The man had walked, which could mean more than 100 kilometers depending on exactly where he'd come from. "Bring him in, and have Ouedraogo present." The old herder looked even more weathered in the artificial light of the presidential office. His boo-boo was dusty from travel, his feet wrapped in worn sandals, but his eyes were clear and sharp as he regarded Traoré with an expression that mixed respect and determination. "Thank you for seeing me, Captain," he said in Fulfulde, which Traoré understood well. "I am Amadou Dicko, and I have come because word has reached even old ears in the bush that there was trouble on the road where you passed. Please, sit." Traoré gestured to a chair, noting how Ouedraogo positioned himself strategically by the door. "You walked all this way to tell me something." "I walked because at my age, I have learned that some truths must be delivered in person. Amadou settled into the chair with the careful movements of aged joints. 3 weeks ago, I saw men. Not from our area. They came in the night when honest people sleep. I was out with a sick cow and I saw them passing. They had motorcycles, weapons. They tried to stay hidden, but old Amadou has eyes that still see in the dark. Did you report this to authorities? Sawadogo asked. To whom? Young warrior. The nearest checkpoint is a day's walk. By the time I could go and return, they might hurt my family. We who live in the bush, we learn to watch and remember, but not always to speak. Traoré leaned forward. Taj, why are you speaking now? Because yesterday, when my Fatima stopped in the road, I saw the fear in your soldiers' eyes. I saw them checking for traps, for danger, and after you passed, I walked to the place where I had seen the strange men weeks ago. The place was disturbed, freshly disturbed, dirt moved, grass pressed down. I am old, but not foolish. I understood something was meant to happen there. The room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Sawadogo had moved closer, his attention completely focused on the herder. Did you make your cow stop in the road? Traoré asked directly. Amadou's weathered face creased into a smile. A man does not make a cow do anything, Captain. A cow decides, and we can only encourage or discourage, but I will tell you this. When I saw your convoy coming, and I saw where my Fatima had decided to stand, I thought perhaps it was Allah's will. So, I did not rush to move her. I waited. I let her take her time. You deliberately delayed us, Sawadogo said, his tone sharp. I let an old cow be an old cow, Amadou replied calmly. Is that a crime in the land of honest people? Traoré studied the herder's face, looking for deception, for any sign of duplicity. He saw only the serene certainty of someone who had lived long enough to trust their instincts. The men you saw 3 weeks ago, Traoré said. Can you describe them? Anything specific? Not our people, not Fulani, not Mossi. They spoke Arabic among themselves. Young men, angry faces. The kind of anger that comes from believing God wants you to hurt others. Amadou paused. I have seen war, Captain. I remember the troubles of the past. These men, they have that same darkness. I hoped they would pass through and be gone, but the land whispered to me that they remained, waiting like scorpions under rocks. The land whispered to you, Sawadogo said skeptically. Do you mock what you do not understand, young warrior? When you have lived on land for 73 years, when you have herded cattle since you could walk, when you have watched generations pass like seasons, you learn to hear what the land says, not with words, with feelings, with knowing. Traoré raised a hand to forestall Sawadogo's response. Amadou, I believe you saw these men. I believe you had concerns. And I believe your delays, intentional or not, may have saved lives. But I need to ask you something directly. Are you connected to these men? Are you a scout for them? The old herder met his gaze unflinchingly. If I were their scout, Captain, would I walk 6 days to tell you I saw them? Would I come to your door to speak truth? He paused, his expression softening. I am a Fulani herder. My father was a herder, his father before him. I have watched this land die slowly from drought and war. I have lost children to disease, grandchildren to hunger, my nephew to violence on these roads. I have no love for those who bring more death to my land. Then why didn't you report them before? Sawadogo pressed. Because I am old and tired, and have learned that reporting often brings more trouble than safety. Because I did not know if they would actually do harm or just pass through. Because I am one old man with cattle to protect, and a family that depends on me. His voice carried the weight of accumulated grief, but when I realized they had prepared death for you, for soldiers trying to protect us, that was different. That required action. Traoré stood and walked to his window, looking out over Ouagadougou. Lights were coming on across the city as evening deepened. Somewhere in that sprawl of humanity, there were people planning violence, gathering intelligence, preparing more attacks. And somewhere, there were people like Amadou, trying to survive, trying to protect what little they had, making impossible choices in an impossible situation. Amadou, Traoré said, turning back, I'm going to ask you to stay in the city for a few days. We'll provide accommodation, food. I want my intelligence people to speak with you, to learn everything you can remember about these men. And when you're ready to return home, we'll provide an escort and compensation for your time. I do not want money for speaking truth, Amadou replied. not for speaking truth. For the risk you took in coming here, for the courage to act when action was dangerous. That deserves recognition in any culture. Chapter 8. Layers of Security. Over the next 3 days, Major Ouedraogo's team debriefed Amadou extensively. What emerged was a disturbing picture of insurgent activity that had gone largely unnoticed in the remote areas between military checkpoints. The old herder had a remarkable memory for detail. He described vehicle types, approximate numbers, movement patterns, even fragments of overheard conversation. Cross-referenced with other intelligence, his information helped identify a network of insurgent cells that had been operating in the region for months. It wasn't a complete picture, but it was more than they'd had before. On the 4th day, Traoré met with his full Security Council to discuss findings and implications. The ambush was definitely planned by a cell affiliated with Ansarul Islam, Major Ouedraogo reported. We've identified 3 of the individuals based on boot prints and other forensic evidence, all known operatives with records of previous attacks. One is believed to be an explosives specialist trained abroad. How did they get the intelligence on my movements? Traoré asked. We've identified 2 possible sources. First, surveillance of helicopter traffic from Ouagadougou. They tracked your departure, calculated likely return routes and times. Second, and more concerning, we found evidence of a remote monitoring device near the northern outpost you visited. Someone placed it to track activity at that location. Minister of Defense Traoré Joseph leaned forward. Are we saying they have technical surveillance capability beyond what we've previously assessed? Yes, Minister. This represents a significant escalation in their operational sophistication. They're receiving support from outside, both training and equipment. We're working with our international partners to trace the source. Traoré absorbed this information grimly. The insurgency wasn't just growing in violence, it was evolving in capability, becoming more sophisticated, more dangerous. What about the information Amadou provided? He asked. Has it led anywhere? Sir, based on his descriptions, we conducted operations in 3 locations over the past 48 hours. We've disrupted 2 weapons caches, arrested 7 suspects, and most significantly, we've identified a route they've been using to move equipment from across the Mali border. It was something, not victory, but progress, the kind of incremental gain that warfare in this environment demanded. Regarding your security, sir, Ouedraogo interjected, we're implementing new protocols. Randomized routes, decoy convoys, expanded aerial reconnaissance, and enhanced counter-surveillance measures. But I need to be direct. The risk to you personally has escalated. They know who you are. They know what your movements mean. You're a target. I've always been a target, Traoré replied. That doesn't change the work. Sir, with respect, there's a difference between general risk and being specifically hunted. This ambush was tailored to you. They're studying you, learning your patterns, your psychology. They know you visit troops, that you travel by road to demonstrate strength. They're using your leadership style against you. It was a fair point, and one that Traoré had been considering himself. Leadership in wartime required visibility, but visibility created vulnerability. We'll adapt, he said finally. Change patterns, vary methods, increase unpredictability, but I won't hide in this office. If my soldiers can face danger in the Sahel, I can face it too. Sir, if you die, the cause dies with you, Colonel Zerbo said bluntly. You've become a symbol. That has strategic value, but it also means your survival isn't just personal, it's national. The weight of that truth settled over the room. When he'd led the coup 2 years ago, Traoré had been acting on frustration with inadequate leadership in the face of growing violence. He'd wanted to change strategy, to take the fight to the insurgents, to restore sovereignty. He hadn't fully anticipated becoming a symbol, a focal point for hope and resistance. Noted, Traoré said. Implement all reasonable security measures, but the work continues. We have a nation to protect, and that protection requires leadership that's present, visible, engaged. As the meeting concluded, Major Ouedraogo approached him privately. Sir, there's one more thing. About Amadou. Yes, he's been cleared completely. No connections to insurgent groups, no suspicious activities. He's exactly what he appears to be, an old herder who saw something wrong and did what he could about it. We're arranging his return home with the compensation you promised, plus additional security for his family. Good. Make sure it's generous. And Major, I want regular monitoring of that area. If Amadou could see these movements, others might see more. We need to develop better human intelligence networks among the rural populations. Sir, that's challenging. These populations often fear both the insurgents and us. Building trust takes time. Then we start now, because technical surveillance can only tell us so much. It took an old man with cattle to save my life. That should tell us something about the value of human intelligence. Chapter 9. The Narrative Challenge. Word of the attempted assassination and the cow that had delayed the convoy spread throughout Burkina Faso and beyond. Social media exploded with interpretations. In the Pan-African online communities that had made Traoré a celebrity, the story was shared thousands of times. Some called it divine intervention. Others saw it as proof of indigenous wisdom. Conspiracy theorists suggested it was all orchestrated. Traoré's communication team struggled with how to address the narrative. His press secretary, Fatima Kanazoe, brought him several proposed statements. We have 3 options, sir. First, we can emphasize the security failure and use it to justify increased military spending and stricter emergency measures. Second, we can focus on the resilience of our intelligence services in disrupting the plot. Third, we can acknowledge the randomness while highlighting the continued threat we face. Traoré read through each proposed statement, finding them all somehow insufficient. What about a 4th option? We tell the truth. Sir, the truth is complicated. An old man, a cow, incredible timing. It sounds, forgive me, it sounds like something from a folk tale rather than serious security analysis. And yet it happened exactly that way. Traoré leaned back in his chair. Fatima, our people are tired of politicians who spin reality to suit agendas. They want honesty. The land of honest people deserves honest leadership. We'll acknowledge the attack was professional, that we're investigating, that we're enhancing security. But we'll also acknowledge that sometimes survival comes down to luck, to providence, to a stubborn cow that stopped in the road at exactly the right moment. The international community will see that as superstitious, unsophisticated, Fatima warned. Let them. I'm not leading the international community. I'm leading Burkina Faso. And our people understand that life is complicated, that there are forces beyond our control, that wisdom can come from unexpected sources. An old Fulani herder saw something wrong and acted on his instincts. That's a lesson worth sharing. The press conference was scheduled for the following morning. Traoré spoke for 20 minutes, laying out facts about the ambush attempt, the ongoing investigation, the security measures being implemented. Then he spoke about Amadou and the cow. I could stand here and claim that our security protocols are perfect, that we anticipated and prevented this attack through superior intelligence. But that would be a lie. The truth is, we were delayed by an animal in the road, and that delay saved lives. The truth is, an elderly herder who has suffered losses to this violence noticed something wrong, and in his own way, tried to help. These truths are complicated and perhaps inconvenient, but they are truths nonetheless. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. So we face a sophisticated enemy that studies us, learns our patterns, plans carefully. They nearly succeeded in killing me and many brave soldiers. This is the reality of the conflict in the Sahel. But we also have assets they cannot match. We have people like Amadou who love this land, who watch over it, who act when action is needed. We have the randomness of life itself, which no amount of planning can fully account for. And we have determination to protect the land of honest people, whatever it takes. The response was mixed. International media focused on the sophisticated nature of the attack and the security implications. Domestic response was more nuanced. In Ouagadougou's markets, people debated whether the cow was a sign from God or from ancestral spirits. Rural communities saw it as vindication of traditional wisdom. The opposition criticized security failures while acknowledging the narrow escape. But among ordinary Burkinabé, the story resonated in a way that surprised even Traoré's own communication team. It became a kind of parable, shared and reshaped with each telling. A reminder that in uncertain times, survival sometimes came down to paying attention, trusting instinct, and accepting that not everything could be controlled. Chapter 10. Moving Forward. 2 weeks after the attempted ambush, Ibrahim Traoré made another trip north, this time varying his route, his timing, and his security protocols. He visited different outposts, spoke with different units, deliberately broke patterns that had become predictable, but he also made an unscheduled stop. The convoy diverted to a small settlement where Amadou had returned with his cattle. Word had spread quickly, and by the time Traoré arrived, a small crowd had gathered. The old herder stood at the edge, not seeking attention, simply present. Traoré approached him directly, aware of the cameras his communication team had brought, aware of the symbolic weight of the moment. "Amadou Diko," he said clearly, "on behalf of Burkina Faso, I thank you for your service to your nation. Not all service comes in uniform. Not all courage is displayed on battlefields. Sometimes the most important acts are the smallest ones, done by those who simply notice what needs to be noticed and act accordingly." He produced a medal, simple but official, bearing the national emblem. This is the Civilian Service Medal, created to recognize citizens who contribute to national security through extraordinary civilian action. You are its first recipient. The old herder looked at the medal, then at Traoré, then laughed. It was a genuine sound, full and unaffected. "Captain, I am a herder. What will I do with a medal? The cows will not be impressed." The crowd laughed with him, and Traoré found himself smiling. "Then keep it for your grandchildren, so they know their grandfather did something important." "Important?" Amadou shook his head, but accepted the medal. "I let a cow be stubborn, and I walked to tell what I saw. This is not heroism, Captain. This is just living right." "Sometimes," Traoré replied, "living right is exactly what heroism looks like." Later, as the convoy prepared to depart, Amadou approached Traoré one last time, speaking quietly so only Traoré and Sawadogo could hear. "You know, Captain, Fatima died 2 days ago, the cow that stopped in the road. She was very old, and her time came." Traoré felt an unexpected pang. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. She had a good life, and at the end she served a purpose. That's all any of us can ask." Amadou paused. "But I will tell you something. The night before she died, she made sounds. Not pain sounds, different sounds, like she was talking to something I couldn't see. My grandmother would have said she was speaking with the spirits, telling them her work was done." "You believe that?" Sawadogo asked, skepticism barely concealed. "I believe," Amadou said slowly, "that the world is larger than what we can measure and weigh. I believe that sometimes things happen for reasons we may never understand. And I believe that cow knew exactly what she was doing when she stopped in that road. Don't ask me how. Old men are allowed their mysteries." As the convoy drove away, Traoré found himself thinking about Amadou's words. The cow was dead now, its moment of inexplicable stubbornness, the last significant act of its life. Coincidence? Providence? Animal instinct intersecting with human fate? He would never know with certainty, but in a war defined by uncertainty, perhaps that was appropriate. They fought against an enemy that hid in shadows, that struck unexpectedly, that defied conventional military solutions. Victory, when it came, would likely come from a combination of military skill, intelligence work, political strategy, and yes, perhaps a measure of pure luck. The cow had been luck. Amadou's watchfulness had been intelligence. The soldiers' professionalism had been military skill. The response had been political strategy. All of it together had created survival. That was the lesson, Traoré realized. No single factor would win this conflict. They needed all of it, from the most sophisticated technology to the instincts of old herders, from special forces operations to the stubborn will of a single cow refusing to move. Chapter 11. The Ripple Effect. In the weeks that followed, the story of the cow in the ambush continued to evolve in the national consciousness. Artists painted murals in Ouagadougou showing a zebu standing guard over the road. Musicians composed songs about wisdom from unexpected sources. School teachers used the story to talk about paying attention to one's surroundings, about the value of experience and observation. But for Ibrahim Traoré, the incident had more practical implications. It had revealed vulnerabilities in his security and intelligence networks. It had demonstrated that the insurgency was more sophisticated than previously assessed, and it had shown that unconventional sources of intelligence, people like Amadou who lived in areas beyond government control, could provide crucial information. Major Ouedraogo's team developed a new program, the Rural Observer Network. It wasn't a formal intelligence apparatus. Instead, it was a system for receiving and processing information from herders, farmers, traders, anyone who traveled the remote areas where insurgents operated. No pressure, no obligation, just a secure way to report concerning activity. The program launched quietly, without fanfare. Within weeks, reports began flowing in. Most were innocuous or already known, but occasionally there were gems of information, observations that helped piece together the insurgency's logistics, their movement patterns, their support networks. It's working better than anticipated, Major Ouedraogo reported in a briefing. We've received 73 reports in the first month. 12 of them contained actionable intelligence. One led to the disruption of a weapons transfer. Another helped us identify a supply route we didn't know existed. What's the profile of the informants? Traoré asked. Diverse. Herders, traders, displaced persons who've returned to their villages, even a few local imams and traditional chiefs. All voluntary. We're careful not to create formal relationships that might endanger them. Anonymous reporting, secure communication, no records of identity. It wasn't a complete solution. The insurgency continued to be a massive challenge. Attacks occurred weekly. Territory remained contested. But it was progress, the kind of incremental gain that built toward eventual stability. Meanwhile, the investigation into the ambush's planning revealed disturbing connections. The cell responsible had links to external supporters, providing training, equipment, and intelligence. Some of that support came from other Sahel insurgent groups. Some appeared to come from further afield as part of the broader network of jihadist organizations operating across Africa and beyond. We're not just fighting a local insurgency, Minister of Defense Joseph reported in a cabinet meeting. We're fighting nodes of a transnational network. They share information, resources, tactics. An attack in Mali informs tactics here. A weapons shipment in Niger ends up in our territory. We need to think regionally, not just nationally. This reality had driven Traoré's participation in the alliance of Sahel states with Mali and Niger. These neighboring countries faced similar challenges, fought similar enemies. Coordination made sense. Shared intelligence made sense. But it was complicated by differing national interests, historical tensions, and the sheer difficulty of coordinating military operations across vast, barely governed spaces. The alliance is meeting next month in Bamako, Colonel Zerbo reminded them. This would be a good opportunity to push for enhanced intelligence sharing, particularly regarding convoy security. If Mali and Niger have similar programs to our Rural Observer Network, we could create a regional early warning system. Traoré nodded. Make it a priority item on the agenda. And see if we can arrange bilateral meetings to discuss cross-border operations in the borderlands, where insurgents move freely. Chapter 12. The Lasting Lesson. 6 months after the cow stopped Ibrahim Traoré's convoy, the captain-president stood once again at a military checkpoint in the Sahel, looking out at the landscape he was committed to protecting. Much had changed in those months. Security protocols had been completely revamped, intelligence networks had expanded, international partnerships had been strengthened, military operations had achieved some successes, pushing back insurgent groups in several regions, though they remained a persistent threat. But some things hadn't changed. The Sahel was still harsh and beautiful, the people were still resilient and vulnerable, the conflict was still complex and brutal, and every day still brought new challenges. New losses, new tests of will and strategy. Ouedraogo approached, tablet in hand. Sir, we have the latest casualty reports. 3 soldiers wounded in an ambush near Dori. The convoy was following new security protocols and managed to fight through without major losses. 3 wounded was 3 too many, but compared to what could have been, compared to the 11 killed at Djibo, compared to what might have happened to his own convoy if not for a cow's stubbornness, it was relatively manageable. How's the morale in the ranks? Traoré asked. Improving, sir. The troops appreciate the changes, the additional resources, the fact that you're still visiting despite the risk. They tell stories about you, about the cow. It's become something of a lucky talisman. Some units have painted cow images on their vehicles. Traoré smiled at that. Whatever helps. A military transport pulled up, carrying supplies for the outpost. Among the soldiers unloading crates, Traoré noticed a young private who moved with careful precision, checking each container against a manifest. Thorough, attentive, the kind of attention to detail that prevented problems. It reminded him of Amadou, of that old herder's ability to notice what others might miss. Observation, attention, care. These weren't exotic skills. They were basic human capabilities that, properly applied, could mean the difference between life and death. That was perhaps the lasting lesson of the cow in the road. Not that divine intervention saved him, though some would always interpret it that way. Not that luck was reliable, though luck had certainly played a role, but that paying attention mattered. That observation from unexpected sources could be crucial. That rigid planning could be undone by simple randomness. That survival required both sophisticated systems and fundamental human awareness. As evening approached and Traoré prepared to return to Ouagadougou, this time by helicopter, he took one last look at the road stretching into the distance. Somewhere along that road, Amadou was tending his cattle, living his life, probably not thinking much about medals or presidential gratitude, just living right, as he'd said, doing what needed to be done. The helicopter lifted off and the Sahel spread below in its evening colors, gold and red and deepening purple. From this height, the individual struggles were invisible, but Traoré knew they were there. Families trying to survive, soldiers holding positions, insurgents planning attacks, herders moving cattle, traders carrying goods, life continuing despite conflict because it had to continue. He was one leader in one nation, facing challenges that spanned continents. He couldn't solve everything. He couldn't predict everything. He couldn't prevent every attack or save every life, but he could pay attention. He could listen to unlikely sources. He could adapt when rigid plans failed. He could learn from cows that stopped in roads and old men who noticed what others missed. That was leadership in the Sahel, in the land of honest people. Not commanding from certainty, but navigating through uncertainty. Not imposing perfect order, but working within beautiful chaos. Not defeating randomness, but accepting it, learning from it, sometimes being saved by it. The helicopter banked toward Ouagadougou, and Ibrahim Traoré smiled, thinking about all of this, about survival and providence and the mysterious wisdom of stubborn cows. The war would continue, the work would continue. But now he carried with him a deeper understanding that strength came not just from military might or political will, but from paying attention to the unexpected, valuing the overlooked, and trusting that sometimes, inexplicably, exactly what needs to happen will happen when it needs to happen, even if it's just a cow refusing to move in the dusty heat of a Sahel afternoon. End. Epilogue. 3 years later. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the presidential compound in Ouagadougou as Ibrahim Traoré reviewed security briefings in his office. 3 years had passed since the cow had stopped his convoy on that dusty road in the Sahel, and the incident had become part of national folklore, retold in countless versions across Burkina Faso and beyond. The security situation had evolved in those years. The insurgency remained a threat, but the nature of the conflict had shifted. The rural observer network that had emerged from Amadou's actions had grown into a sophisticated community intelligence system, providing early warnings that had prevented dozens of attacks. Military operations, informed by better intelligence and enhanced regional cooperation through the alliance of Sahel states, had reclaimed territory and disrupted insurgent networks, though permanent victory remained elusive. Major Ouedraogo, now promoted to colonel, entered the office carrying a folder. "Sir, I thought you'd want to see this. It's the annual report on the Rural Observer Network. The numbers are remarkable." Traoré took the folder, scanning the statistics. Over 3,000 voluntary observers across the Sahel region, more than 800 actionable intelligence reports in the past year alone, 42 attacks prevented or mitigated through advance warning, lives saved, operations disrupted, communities protected. "It's working beyond what we initially hoped," Ouedraogo continued. "But more than that, it's changed the relationship between rural communities and security forces. People feel invested in their own protection. They're not just passive victims waiting for government help. They're participants in their own security." It was true. The psychological shift had been as important as the tactical gains. Communities that had felt abandoned, caught between insurgent violence and sometimes heavy-handed military responses, now had agency. They could contribute without becoming formal collaborators, which would have made them targets. The anonymity of the system protected them while empowering them. "There's something else," Ouedraogo said, his expression softening. "We received word yesterday from the Sahel region. Amadou Dicko passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 76. Traoré felt a genuine pang of loss. He had met with the old herder several times over the years, informal conversations that had nothing to do with intelligence or security, just two men from different worlds finding common ground in their love for Burkina Faso. Amadou had never lost his straightforward wisdom, his ability to see clearly through complexity. "His family?" Traoré asked. "They're well. The security provisions we put in place have protected them. His grandson actually joined the military last year, says he was inspired by his grandfather's example." That would have made Amadou laugh, Traoré thought. The old herder had never sought recognition or wanted his story to inspire recruitment. He had just done what seemed right in the moment. Let his stubborn cow delay a convoy, walk to the capital to share what he knew, arrange for a delegation to attend the funeral, Traoré ordered, and make sure the family knows that Burkina Faso remembers his service. After Ouedraogo departed, Traoré walked to the window overlooking Ouagadougou. The capital had grown in 3 years, despite the ongoing conflict. New construction dotted the skyline. The gold refinery he had inaugurated was processing domestic ore, keeping wealth within the country. Agricultural initiatives were bearing fruit. The airport expansion was nearly complete. Life continued, adapted, persisted. His phone buzzed with a message from his communication team. Social media was lighting up with tributes to Amadou. The story was being retold again. The herder who had noticed danger. The cow that had stopped at exactly the right moment. The president who had listened to an unlikely source. It had become a modern parable, adapted to each telling, but always carrying the same core truth. Wisdom could come from unexpected places, and attention to detail could mean the difference between disaster and survival. That evening, Traoré attended a ceremony at the military academy where new officers were receiving their commissions. In his address to the graduates, he spoke about leadership, about strategy, about the evolving nature of conflict in the Sahel. But he ended with a story. 3 years ago, I was nearly killed in an ambush that had been meticulously planned by sophisticated enemies. Advanced intelligence gathering, professional execution, perfect timing. Everything about it was designed to succeed, and it would have succeeded, except for one factor the attackers couldn't predict or control. An old cow decided to stop in the road and refuse to move. The young officers listened intently, most of them familiar with the story, but hearing it now directly from him. That cow created a delay of 20 minutes. 20 minutes that meant the difference between life and death for me and everyone in that convoy. Was it luck? Providence? Animal instinct? I've spent 3 years considering that question, and I still don't have a complete answer. But I've learned something more important than the answer. He paused, looking at the faces before him. These young men and women who would lead soldiers, make life and death decisions, carry the weight of responsibility in an uncertain world. I've learned that the world is more complex than our training manuals acknowledge, that rigid planning, while necessary, must be balanced with flexibility. That intelligence comes from unconventional sources, from old herders and rural observers, and people we might otherwise overlook. That no matter how sophisticated our systems become, there will always be elements we cannot control or predict. And that sometimes, the most important skill a leader can have is the wisdom to recognize when randomness has intervened, and the humility to be grateful for it. He gestured toward a painting that hung in the Academy's main hall, commissioned the year after the incident. It showed a zebu standing on a dusty road, the Sahel landscape stretching behind it, storm clouds gathering in the distance, but sunlight breaking through. It wasn't realistic in style, more impressionistic, but it captured something essential about that moment. That cow's name was Fatima. She was 13 years old, which is elderly for a zebu. She died 2 days after delaying my convoy, having lived a full life doing what cows do, providing for her owner's family, being part of the ecosystem of Sahel pastoralism. She never knew she had saved anyone's life. She just stood in a road because old cows sometimes do that. Some of the officers smiled at this, appreciating the mundane reality beneath the mythologized story. But her owner, Amadou Diko, who passed away yesterday, he knew. He saw the connection between strange men he'd observed weeks earlier and the place where his cow stopped. He didn't have intelligence training. He didn't have sophisticated analysis tools. He just had a lifetime of observation, the wisdom of age, and the courage to act on his instincts. Traoré's voice grew more serious. You are being commissioned as officers in one of the most challenging security environments in the world. You will need everything your training has given you, all the technical skills, tactical knowledge, strategic thinking. But you will also need what cannot be taught in classrooms: the wisdom to listen to unlikely sources, the flexibility to adapt when plans fail, the humility to learn from everyone around you, regardless of their rank or education or background. He looked at the painting again, that stubborn cow on an empty road. The Fulani people, Amadou's people, have a saying: the cattle know the way to water before the herder announces it. It means that sometimes those closest to the situation understand things that distant commanders cannot see. As officers, you will be commanders, but you must also be listeners, observers, students of the unexpected. The ceremony concluded with the traditional oaths and the presentation of commissions. As the new officers dispersed, several approached Traoré to ask questions, to shake his hand, to express their commitment to service. He saw in their young faces the same determination he had felt at their age, before coups and counterinsurgency, before becoming the world's youngest head of state, before a cow had saved his life. Later that night, working late in his office as he often did, Traoré drafted a personal letter to Amadou's family. Not an official condolence from the state, though that would come too, but a personal note from one human to another, acknowledging a debt that could never be fully repaid. "Your father and grandfather," he wrote, "taught me something I needed to learn at exactly the moment I needed to learn it. He showed me that wisdom is not the exclusive province of the educated or the powerful, that observation matters more than credentials, that acting on what you know is worth more than knowing what you cannot act upon." His legacy lives not just in his family, but in the thousands of Burkinabés who have joined the Rural Observer Network, in the lives saved by community vigilance, in the changing relationship between our people and their security forces. He paused in his writing, considering what else needed to be said. Outside his window, Ouagadougou continued its evening rhythm. Somewhere in the Sahel, herders were settling their cattle for the night. Somewhere, insurgents were planning tomorrow's violence. Somewhere, soldiers stood watch, life in all its complexity, continuing despite everything, because it had to continue. "I'm often asked," Traoré continued writing, "whether I believe the cow's intervention was divine providence or mere coincidence. I tell people that the question misses the point. What matters is not why the cow stopped, but what your father did with that moment. He could have hurried the animal along. He could have kept silent about what he'd observed. He could have decided his observations weren't important enough to act upon. Instead, he made choices that saved lives, and those choices emerged from a lifetime of paying attention, of caring about his land and his people, of having the courage to trust his own judgment." He signed the letter simply, without titles or formality, just his name. Tomorrow it would be delivered along with more official recognition, but tonight it was just one man acknowledging another's impact on his life and his nation. 3 years had passed since a cow stopped in a road. In that time, Burkina Faso had continued its struggle with insurgency, its journey towards stability, its effort to maintain sovereignty while navigating complex international pressures. There had been victories and setbacks, progress and frustration, lives saved and lives lost. The conflict that had nearly claimed Traoré's life continued, though its shape and intensity had evolved. But something had shifted in those 3 years, something harder to quantify than military gains or territorial control. The story of Amadou and his cow had become part of the national consciousness, a reminder that in uncertain times, salvation could come from unexpected sources. It had inspired a more participatory approach to security, had validated the knowledge of ordinary citizens, had created space for wisdom that didn't come from military academies or political offices. As Traoré finally prepared to leave his office for the night, he took one last look at a photograph on his desk. It showed him standing next to Amadou at that settlement in the Sahel, the old herder holding the Civilian Service Medal with an expression of bemused pride, both men squinting against the sun. Behind them, barely visible, was a herd of cattle, including what might have been Fatima, though it was hard to tell Zebu apart in photographs. It was a good photograph, capturing something authentic about that moment, about the connection between a revolutionary leader and a traditional herder, between modern governance and ancient wisdom, between the official Burkina Faso of protocols and press conferences, and the real Burkina Faso of cattle and dust and people trying to survive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Intelligence reports to review, security decisions to make, political pressures to navigate, a nation to lead through ongoing crisis. But tonight, Traoré allowed himself a moment of simple gratitude. Gratitude for survival, for lessons learned, for unexpected teachers like Amadou, for the mysterious workings of fate or chance or providence that had placed a stubborn cow in a road at exactly the right moment. The land of honest people continued its journey, uncertain and difficult, but carried forward by millions of individual acts of courage, observation, and commitment. Some of those acts would be recorded in history books. Most would pass unnoticed, except by those directly affected, but all of them mattered, just as much as that cow's inexplicable decision to stop and stand immovable had mattered on a dusty afternoon 3 years ago. Traoré turned off the lights in his office and headed home, carrying with him the weight of leadership, the hope of progress, and the humble awareness that despite all his plans and strategies, sometimes the most important interventions came from sources no leader could predict or control. In that awareness lay not weakness but wisdom, not resignation but resilience, not defeat but the kind of realistic hope that sustained people through long struggles toward uncertain futures. The stars were bright over Ouagadougou as he drove through the capital's streets, the same stars that shone over the Sahel where Amadou's family mourned their loss. The same stars that had witnessed centuries of history in this land would witness centuries more, indifferent observers of human struggle and survival. Under those stars, the land of honest people continued its journey, one day at a time, one choice at a time, sometimes saved by the most unlikely interventions, always sustained by the determination of its people to keep moving forward despite everything. And somewhere in the collective memory of the nation, a cow named Fatima stood eternal on a dusty road, unaware of her significance, unconcerned with history, just being exactly what she was in exactly the moment she needed to be it. A perfect embodiment of the mysterious grace that occasionally, inexplicably, intersects with human necessity and creates survival from what should have been catastrophe. End.